Gone are the days of the trail and its glory. Clear comes the call, but there's none to reply. White-covered trains wend their way through their story. Men on the ranges rode hither and by. Chapter 3. The Fate of Hill Loftis. Hill Loftis, the last of the Red Buck Wayman gang, soon left Texas and went to Kansas City. He spent several weeks with Lod Callahan, then inspector for the Cattle Association at the stockyards. He stayed away for several years. He ventured into South America, and then came back and worked on a ranch in Montana. He once told me that he had rather be in a pen in Texas than a free man in South America. It seems only logical to tell the fate of Bill Loftis at this point, though I get ahead of my story a bit. Loftis wrote to Jeff Harkey, sheriff of Dickens County, asking to come back and stand trial for murder. He knew he had been gone long enough to get a better trial by jury. He had legally changed his name to Tom Ross. This was around the turn of the century. Hill was tried in Vernon, Texas, and acquitted. I met Hill Loftis quite by accident soon after his return to Texas. I was passing a dugout in Knowles, New Mexico, and he came out the door. I spoke to him and called him by his old handle. He quickly informed me that his name was Tom Ross, and for me to forget the other name. We talked for a spell. He tried to get me to go into cow stealing business with him. I tried to talk him about going straight. He said, "Cochrain, I was born to steal and don't know any other way." Hill had flashing black eyes that could pierce through a man like cold steel, and a watermelon-shaped head that was a feature one never forgot. Before his trial, he came to Hill Ranch where I was working to talk to his friend Billy Conley. Conley was running a wagon at the time. Two officers out to make a name for themselves came to the roundup and asked for Tom Ross. When they hauled out for him to surrender, he broke into a run on a horse and rode to the wagon ahead of the officers, and got his own horse and Winchester. He shot and killed the horse of one lawman, then ran up to them and captured them both. He would have killed them, but Billy asked him to let the men go, reminding Hill of his impending trial in Vernon. He made the men promise never to bother him again. When he was ready to go into trial, he went by the way of Stanton, and got one of the same officers who escorted him to Vernon for protection. After he was acquitted, he married Trixie Harden from Lake County, New Mexico, and started a spread of his own in Gaines County, and over into the Knowles. Knowles, New Mexico was started in 1902 by Mr. Knowles. The post office was established, a two-story hotel, where I once attended a big dance, several buildings, and a bank. The first saloon on the High Plains was built by Knowles. The little town was advertised nationally, and the local newspaper indicated that a railhead was to be established there. Teams and men were employed to make cuts and hills for the proposed tracks. After the lots in the town were sold, all the work on this railroad ceased, and the little town folded up in 1916. The old saloon remained, and was a center of liquor purchases in the area for many years. Now only an old country bank vault remains. Most people were afraid of Hill. He was as mean as could be once he got his dander up, yet he had quite a collection of friends. If he liked a man, he would do anything for him. If he didn't, he would have just as soon shoot him in the back as the front. But he was the luckiest outlaw I ever saw. He was in and out of shootings all his life, and only got hit once, and by a woman at that. Even when some thought Hill was going straight, I knew he was doing everything he could to get his hands on. He held up a man named Jack Russell and made him write out a $500 check to him. Then he kept Mr. Russell with him until he got the check cashed. He was indicted for highway robbery on that one. D. Harkey, brother to the sheriff Hill surrendered to, was on the grand jury. He advised Hill to settle outside the courtroom. This little escapade cost Hill around $2,700. Jack Russell got scared of Hill and went to Arizona. Then Judge Bryce moved Hill's case from Lovington, New Mexico, to Roswell. Hill sent word to the judge he was out to kill him if he didn't move the case back to Lake County. The judge did not scare. At the same time he was charged with highway robbery, he was also soon after charged with murder in Seminole, Texas. In 1909, his only child, Bessie, was born. This girl, from all appearances, worshipped her father. Hill had plenty of friends in those days, but he had more enemies than one man could handle. He had a superior capacity for loving and hating. For him, there seemed to be no middle of the road. Either you were for him or against him. He was uncommonly suspicious of everyone who took the letter stand. It has been said that the feudist loves his friends and hates his enemies, and he can neither love nor hate too violently to make him regret any excess in either direction. That was certainly Hill, alias Tom Ross. At the same time, Hill bought his ranch about 25 miles west of Seminole. In 1901, he was getting his mail, as mentioned, in Knowles, New Mexico. He continued to prosper. At that time, Gaines County, about 40 miles long and nearly as deep, had only one town in the county, Seminole, and it was the county seat. They had about 300 citizens, and the rest of the county had 200. Enemies of Hill Loftis steered clear of his place. No one had the nerve to press charges against that man. That is until two daring cattle inspectors got hot on his trail. The good work of Inspectors David Allison and Horace Robertson was at the beginning of the end of both. They piled up evidence against Hill, gathering from scratch as no one would talk. Not only did Horace Robertson accumulate facts and indictments against Hill, he made a trip over to the Pecos County and came up with positive proof that Tom had killed a Mexican bootlegger whom he had buried in a shallow grave. The Mexican was identified by a ring, but Robertson would never get to the grand jury with his biggest report, and Tom Ross knew he couldn't stand trial for another murder. On April 1st, 1923, Hill and Milt Good revived scenes from olden times when they made their grandstand appearance into a little lobby of the Gaines Hotel. It was an epoch in Southwest history which bordered on the unbelievable. At 8 o'clock in the evening, most of the townfolks were at church for Easter services. Sheriff Britton, gunless, had started to church, changed his mind, and headed for the hotel where he knew Robertson and Allison were gathered with their important men to prepare for a meeting with the grand jury the next day. In the little lobby, there were 8 chairs, a stove, a telephone stand, a table about 3 feet long, and a large trunk. There was a stairway leading up one side of the small room. The front door opened from a porch or gallery. One door inside opened into the dining room, from which exit was easy through the kitchen to the back of the yard. Another door led to a washroom, with no avenue of escape. Besides the sheriff and the 2 inspectors, several other important men were present that night. There was Judge McGuire, district attorney, Judge Lockhart, Bill Birdwell, a farmer, and Bill Williamson, and the eminent Judge Morgan. At some time or another, Charlie Richards had been in and out of the room, for it was he who reported the seating positions of each man that night to the waiting assassins, Hill and Good. Sudden and violent was the entrance of the killers. Sheriff Britton, who was seated facing the doors, first saw the muzzle of a black-barrel shotgun as Ross poked it through the half-open door. The door opened a bit further, and the sheriff recognized Hill behind the gun. He had directed at Robertson, who was seated across the table from Allison. Allison had complained of a headache and had leaned forward a bit on the table, head in hands. He was unaware of the danger. Then a shot rang out. Smoke filled the crowded lobby. Horace Robertson's head fell forward onto his chest. He never again made another move. Even his hands were in their original positions. Instant death. The second shot, quickly fired, hit Allison just above the heart. He fell forward and crumpled on the floor. It was then that Milt Good threw the door wide open and entered the room, followed by Ross. Ross was heard to say, "Do your duty, Milt." "Bluey!" exclaimed George Lockhart, leaping from his chair. "We'd better get out of here." Though Hill had ordered everyone to keep still, they wouldn't get hurt. The men dashed from one room, going in all directions. Sheriff Britton dashed out through the back door. Judge Morgan arose and stood dead still in the center of the room, watching in horror, and Ross approached the body of Robertson and pumped excess bullets into the dead man. Good stooped over Allison and filled him with more lead. At the time of this cold-blooded murder, Hill Loftis was 50 and a wealthy man. Milt Good, champion rodeo artist, was 34 and a father of 9 children. It was Mrs. Horace Robertson, newly made widow, who appeared on the stairs dressed only in a white nightgown, and uttered a cry of disbelief as she saw the 2 bodies, one sitting, one stretched out on the floor. Quickly she leaped down the stairs, over the body of Allison, and reached her husband's side. She found his automatic pistol, threw off safely, and ran through the front door. She fired twice at the fleeing gunman. One bullet hit Ross in the middle of the upper section of his abdomen. The other struck Good's hand. Tom turned and fired, but his bullet hit the door spring. The sheriff got back to the hotel. Some claimed he hid out. There was no one to arrest. Martha Plummer Robertson, a stout, courageous, typical frontier woman, had come to Seminole with her husband since she accompanied him on all his trips. Before the marriage 2 years prior, she had been a nurse and superintendent of the Lee Surgical Hospital in San Antonio. Feeling extremely tired from the long trip to Seminole by auto, she had excused herself and gone upstairs to read. Hearing a shot, she sprang from her bed and threw her kimono over her arm, and within seconds she appeared at the top of the stairs. Bare feet, she flew down the stairs to her husband, too late. Judge Morgan had stood dead still in the middle of the room during the entire shootout. It was his testimony that really nailed the two men to their cross. Tom Ross and Milt Good both received long prison terms. Both escaped. Only Good was recaptured. Good was then instrumental in helping get started the first, now famous, Huntsville Rodeo. As for Hill, he lived to kill and steal again and again. When he escaped from prison, he headed back for Montana. He went to work on a ranch. Eventually, word got out that he was wanted. The boss sent a man named Haygood out to the ranch to tell Ross he was fired. Ross shot Haygood, then went into the bunkhouse and put his gun to his own head. His body was shipped back to Lovington via Midland, Texas.